Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing without struggle. Now, the struggle may be a physical one, it may be a moral one, or it may be physical and moral. Power has never conceded anything without struggle. It never has, and it never will. But I'm an attorney who has done a wide range of human rights and international law, and in the 90s I did a lot of work around the squatter movement and the homelessness movement and shelter movements in New York City, which I saw on a personal level as a natural extension of my own beliefs. As long before I was a lawyer, and long after I'm no longer a lawyer, I'll be a human being, I'd like to think. So, you have to take stands on issues. I had lived in the Lower East Side for a while, and the squatter movement was really bursting on the scenes, and I had a lot of friends who were squatters, and so I was approached by some friends and asked whether I would represent the coalition of squats. Actually, even before the 13th Street resistance, there was a period of 3 or 4 years where we had a constant battle where if there was a fire in a squad, or if the marshals would come to a squad, or if HPD would come to a squad, and there would be a whole process where resistance would develop, negotiations would develop, confrontations would develop, street fights would occur. And as a lawyer, there are those who think I instigated, there are those who think I sort of tried to desensitize the issue or sensitize the issue. But I had done a lot of work around squats and homelessness and Tompkins Square Park and the Lower East Side for years, when the 13th Street case sort of crystallized the whole issue of squatting. What I always found so interesting about the squatter movement, or the concept of squatting and the notion of adverse possession, is that while the ruling class in this city understands that once a year, like for example Rockefeller Center and other areas of New York City, have to be closed down for a day with no one from the public allowed, because if you fail to do that, an argument can be made that adverse possession has occurred. So what they do is the ruling class breaks the ability of the public to go into an area just long enough to defeat any claim of adverse possession. So while the ruling class and the rich and the people that control the laws in this state in general, in this city in particular, were sensitive to the notion of adverse possession, when it came to people making use of adverse possession in a meaningful and a vibrant and an important and an age-old traditional way, everyone got all fucked up. What do you mean? You can take over stuff. You can adversely possess. Well, let me see if we can figure this out. There are hundreds of thousands of people living on the street. There are thousands of abandoned buildings. There are people that want nothing but to make clean, safe, habitable housing for themselves and for community and for their community. Duh, sounds to me like it's an answer. On the other hand, if they were, if it was the Christian right was doing it and setting up adverse possession as a means of creating pro-life collectives, it would have been fine. But because the squatters were also, talking about things like homelessness and it was during a period where there was a lot of activity around the AIDS crisis in this city, and people were becoming politically active in a lot of levels, and the issue of whose body is it, and the issue of whose community is it, was all coming together. It became a no-no. So the 13th Street squatter issue really sort of crystallized a lot in this city around the issue. And it was a big debate, because while folks knew it was just a matter of time before evictions took place, or attempted evictions, there was a consensus that of all the squatter communities in the Lower East Side, perhaps that was the squatter community most together from the standpoint of having best recorded the records, the traditions, with photos and documents that they had adversely possessed in an unbroken chain for years. And of all the buildings in which that have been used to anchor the community, to safeguard the community, to rid the community of some dangerous situations, those 5 buildings were probably best equipped. So those buildings, after a lot of debate, took a different spin and said, no, we're not going to wait to be evicted at that point. We're going into court and seek title, seek claim. And everyone said, are you fucking out of your minds in New York City? What do you mean you're taking these buildings? Well, we took them over when they were abandoned. We took them over when they were shooting galleries. We took them over when they were burning to the ground. We took them over when there were dogs fighting in the back. We took them over when women and children were being abused and raped, and we made them safe. And we put thousands of hours of sweat equity and labor, and we revitalized the community, and they had storefronts and really dangerous things like poetry reading and jazz festivals and food kitchens and acupuncture clinics, real subversive stuff. So we wanted to take the city on. So I was approached by the group and said, listen, let's go into court. And although I had done a lot of squatter work before then, I really had not done a whole lot in terms of the classic adverse possession work. So I brought together, while I got a lot of the, quote, public credit for it, it really was an effort of a lot of lawyers and paralegals and people that had become far more expert than law professors in the area of adverse possession. And we spent about 6 months to a year building our case. And when we were ready, we proceeded affirmatively in court by way of a show cause order saying, look, let the city show cause why we shouldn't get this property. And it totally fucked with the city, because folks, said, all right, you've got the rules, you've got the game, we're going to play it, and we came in. So we got a very open and good and fair judge, and we spent about a year and worth of different types of litigation, and eventually, we actually went to trial, and we had a 12-week trial. And we won the trial. During the course of it, part of the process we had to allow HPD to come in to check on the buildings, and of course they found problems in one of the buildings or 2 of the buildings, and so they said, well, these 1 or 2 you couldn't live in while the litigation was pending. So we won. We got a great airtight decision. It was a remarkable victory, because here it was, adverse possession, something that I had heard about, interestingly enough, in law school 15 years earlier, which had to do with Europe originally during the Middle Ages, where the king was afraid of squatters taking over these large, huge tracts of land because they wanted to do something revolutionary, like live in a safe, habitable environment and feed their children and be a benefit to the community. They developed this notion of adverse possession. We eventually lost on appeal in a close decision, and we lost on class-based logic. We did not lose because we were wrong in the law. We did not lose because we were wrong in the facts. We lost because the political power in this city said, are you out of your fucking mind? We're going to get an appellate division panel that says it's okay for people to take property. And it pitted us during the middle. Keep in mind, the 13th Street battle occurred while there was a housing group that I used to call the Step and Fetch It for New York City, a local community organizing group that was developing abandoned buildings in this city, but were making big money off it, were getting big salaries. They were taking over property. They wanted to take 13th Street, and they wanted to turn it into really condos and co-ops and manage them and make money and pay their own salaries. So we ended up in the unusual position, the difficult position of not only taking on the city, but taking on a local community-based organization which said they were committed to renovating the community for their own people. So it had all sorts of notions of class and race and that was sort of intertwined. We lost eventually. The buildings were eventually gentrified. The neighborhood has not gone much further than it was then, but we certainly turned a lot of heads. We made some good law. As it turns out, there was a course taught at a law school in the Midwest, I don't even remember where, they called and asked me specifically around using the 13th Street Squad as a primer for adverse possession. So it was a good time.